Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the absolutely fascinating 60-year journey of how Nike evolved from a scrappy, grassroots operation into a completely dominant global powerhouse. We're going to trace their history, look at their growth strategies, unpack those game-changing innovations, and really dig into the profound controversies that shaped the brand we all know today. Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We're going to cover 5 key eras today, starting with their remarkably humble beginnings, selling from a car boot, going through the legal battles, the magic of their marketing, the backlash over sweatshops, and finally, their modern market monopoly. All right, section 1, selling from a car boot. Things that don't scale. Let's start right at the beginning. The year is 1964. Founders Phil Knight and his former track coach, Bill Bowerman, formed a company called Blue Ribbon Sports. And their initial business model, well, it was about as low-tech as it gets. They were literally selling imported Japanese Onitsuka Tiger running shoes straight out of the trunks of their cars at local track meets across the Pacific Northwest. Now, what's really wild here is the sheer hustle of their very first full-time employee, a guy named Jeff Johnson. Knight hired him in 1965, and Johnson somehow managed to sell 3,250 pairs of shoes in just 10 months. Knight famously called this a completely impossible feat. Oh, and a quick fun fact for you. It was actually Johnson, who was a big student of Greek mythology, that later dreamed up the name Nike, completely inspired by the Greek goddess of victory. This brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between how we do business today and how Nike built its foundation. Think about modern digital metrics compared to Johnson's highly manual method. He created a physical index card for every single customer. We're talking handwritten birthday notes, training tips, get-well cards. He literally hired a cobbler to graft new rubber soles onto a customer's shoes when they complained about the cushioning. It's crazy, but he turned customers into die-hard fans one by one, sparking this massive word-of-mouth network that sold their first 50,000 shoes. Moving right along to section 2, waffles and legal battles, the innovation moat. Let's see how a pretty dramatic split forced this young company to either innovate or face total extinction. So picture this. By 1971, Blue Ribbon Sports had captured a whopping 70% share of the imported shoe market in the US. But then, their supplier, Onitsuka Tiger, starts secretly looking for other American distributors. Fearing they'd be cut out of the market entirely, Phil Knight hastily secured a new supplier and launched the independent Nike brand. And as you might guess, this triggered 2 massive lawsuits over breach of contract, one in Japan and one in the US. Fortunately for Knight, the US judge ruled in their favor, which ultimately allowed Nike to survive. But look, surviving a lawsuit is just step 1, right? They needed a serious product edge. Meanwhile, co-founder Bill Bowerman was obsessing over a highly practical problem. The University of Oregon had just installed this slick, hard urethane track. Traditional heavy metal spikes dug in way too deep and were dangerous, but flat soles? No grip at all. So how on earth do you fix a slick track problem without using spikes? The really surprising answer was sitting right in his kitchen. Bowerman was staring at a 1936 Burstead manufacturing waffle iron, a wedding gift he and his wife received 35 years earlier. He realized that the raised grid pattern could actually provide lightweight traction. So what does he do? He pours liquid urethane straight into the appliance. It instantly glued shut and literally ruined his wife's wedding present. But hey, it sparked a multi-billion-dollar footwear revolution. That incredibly messy kitchen experiment evolved super quickly. Hand-cobbled prototypes made it to the 1972 Olympic trials, and they even earned the nickname the Moon Shoe because of the distinct tracks they left in the dirt. By 1975, this had evolved into the mass-market waffle trainer, racking up over 100,000 orders. The waffle sole absolutely cemented Nike's reputation as a problem-solving innovator that just dared to look at sports science differently. Okay, section 3. The magic of marketing, building the brand moat. Because let's face it, superior traction alone doesn't build a global empire. We need to explore how Nike engineered an almost impenetrable cultural brand identity. Now, this might just be the most shocking origin story in the history of advertising. Back in 1988, ad agency founder Dan Whedon needed a slogan that would speak to literally everyone, from elite athletes to casual mall walkers. Unbelievably, he adapted the dark final words of a convicted death row inmate, Gary Gilmore. Before his execution, Gilmore famously said, "Let's do it." "We didn't tweak that just a little bit and just do it" became one of the most universal, culturally defining taglines we have ever seen. If you're wondering how exactly this marketing magic works, this theoretical model breaks down the exact mechanism. By creating a tough, successful, and highly distinctive brand personality, they drive what researchers call athlete identification. Essentially, by tying their brand to the personal stories of elite athletes, Nike effectively turns consumer emotional attachment directly into consumer spending. It's a brilliant cycle. And there is absolutely no greater example of this than their 1984 partnership with a young Michael Jordan. Nike structured a revolutionary revenue-sharing agreement with him. They projected, they might sell maybe $3 million worth of Air Jordans by year 4. Instead, driven by that intense athlete identification we just talked about, they generated an astonishing $126 million in just the very first year. It was a template that changed sports marketing forever. Which brings us to Section 4, Sweatshops and Global Backlash, a crisis of conscience. Because as Nike expanded its supply chain into East Asia, they encountered a massive, highly publicized dark period that fundamentally challenged their corporate ethics. In the 1990s, the company faced a cascading series of PR and humanitarian crises. In 1991, a major report detailed incredibly poor conditions and low pay in their Indonesian subcontracted factories. Then, in 1996, Life magazine published a truly jarring photo of a 12-year-old boy in Pakistan sewing a Nike soccer ball. The global backlash was immense. And it's important to note these challenges didn't stop in the 90s. They faced student protests in 2016 over labor violations in Vietnam, and in 2020, reports emerged alleging ties to forced labor from Uyghurs in China. As you can see, the immense public pressure and activist campaigns really forced Nike to adapt its institutional practices. While they initially claimed they had little control over independent subcontractors, sustained boycotts forced a major shift. By 2002, they began rigorous health and safety audits. By 2005, they were publishing full social responsibility reports. And by 2017, they were granting full factory access to independent watchdogs like the Worker Rights Consortium to help repair their image. And finally, Section 5, the modern market monopoly, oligopoly, and DTC. Emerging from decades of intense growth and controversy, let's look at how Nike essentially weaponized its history, its capital, and its brand power into the dominance it holds today. Despite intense global competition, Nike now commands an incredible 38% of the entire global sportswear market. Economists actually define the current landscape as a tight oligopoly, where just a few massive players, mainly Nike, Adidas, and Puma, control the vast majority of the global market share, which allows them to effectively set prices above marginal costs. So, how do they sustain that oligopoly? Well, they continually reinvest profits into massive barriers to entry. Their brand equity alone is valued at over $160 billion. They spend $4 to $5 billion every single year just on marketing and demand creation, a figure that is literally impossible for a startup to match. Add in deeply patented technologies like Air and Flyknit, plus masterclass acquisitions like buying Converse for $305 million and scaling it to $2.4 billion a year in revenue, and you have a true corporate fortress. Now, this part is fascinating. Take a look at their recent strategic pivot to a direct-to-consumer, or DTC, model. Tracking their margins through 2024, going direct to the consumer actually generates revenue at margins about 10 percentage points higher than traditional wholesale. So they are significantly increasing their profits without actually hiking up the prices for you and me. They achieve this by intentionally severing ties with massive wholesale middlemen. They slash their retail accounts from over 30,000 down to just a few dozen key partners, even drastically cutting back supply to major players like Foot Locker. By doing this, Nike completely regained total control over their pricing, their brand presentation, and perhaps most importantly in today's world, their proprietary consumer data. And having that total control allows them to take massive cultural risks. A great example. In 2018, for the 30th anniversary of Just Do It, Nike featured Colin Kaepernick, a figure at the very center of intense national debate. While this sparked viral protests and literal shoe burning on social media, market analysts note it was a highly calculated risk. The campaign resonated deeply with Nike's core target demographic, ultimately paying off financially and entrenching their cultural dominance even further. We've seen how Nike evolved from selling shoes out of a car trunk to deploying a multi-billion-dollar machine of patents, marketing, and data to protect its empire. So we want to leave you with this final thought. Given the massive, self-reinforcing oligopoly Nike has built today, are the barriers to entry now simply too high? Could two young innovators selling shoes out of a car trunk ever realistically disrupt the global market again? Thanks for exploring this explainer with us today.